Sparkles. She caught me staring, and instead of looking away, I told her the truth. That single moment changed everything between us. The second time she came to my table, I didn't even realize I'd been watching her for so long. The diner wasn't crowded that night, but it wasn't empty either. There were enough voices murmuring over plates, the clatter of dishes from the kitchen, and the faint buzz of the neon sign outside bleeding red light onto the window panes. And yet, all of that faded compared to her. She moved with a rhythm that felt unintentional but natural, like she had long ago memorized the steps it took to navigate around every booth, every chair, every impatient customer. I kept noticing little things. The way she tucked her order pad against her apron as if it were part of her, the way she leaned down slightly to catch someone's words over the noise, and the way her smile was polite but never careless. It wasn't the smile of a young girl trying to charm tips from strangers. It was steadier, quieter, like she gave only what she meant. I guess that's what caught me staring. The honesty in her movements. And then, suddenly, she was in front of me, coffee pot in hand. Her brow arched just slightly, her lips pressed together in something that wasn't quite a frown, but not a smile either. "You're staring," she said softly. Not accusing, not playful. Just noticing. Her words jolted me. I could have laughed it off. I could have looked down at the table, at my half-finished plate, pretended I'd been somewhere else in my head. But I didn't. Something in me refused to let the moment slip away under a joke. Instead, I met her eyes and said quietly, "You gave me the reason." The words surprised even me. Honest, maybe too honest. For a second, I thought she might laugh, or worse, walk away, shutting down the moment as quickly as it had opened. But she didn't. She blinked once, slowly, and in her pause I saw something shift. Her face softened, like the weight of being seen had caught her off guard. Her hand lingered on the coffee pot, not pouring, just holding it near my cup as if she'd forgotten the task that had brought her over. The hum of the diner seemed louder all of a sudden, but between us, silence stretched thin, like the surface of glass. Finally, she tilted the pot, filling my cup with a steady stream. The faint aroma of coffee rose between us. She set the pot down gently, her fingers brushing the edge of the table. Then she looked at me again, longer this time. Not a glare, not a warning. Just searching. "You shouldn't say things like that," she murmured. Her voice carried no anger, but there was an undertone, a mix of caution and something else I couldn't name. I only gave a small smile. "Maybe I shouldn't. But it's the truth." For the briefest moment, her lips curved upward. A quiet, reluctant smile she tried to hide but couldn't quite suppress. Then, just as quickly, she straightened, picked up the pot, and moved on to the next table. But as she walked away, I realized something had shifted between us. It wasn't just a customer and a waitress anymore. Something unspoken lingered, fragile, dangerous, but impossible to ignore. After that night, something quiet lingered between us. It wasn't spoken about, and maybe it never would be, but I felt it each time I pushed open the glass door of the diner. The bell above chimed softly, and almost always, her eyes flicked up before she even realized. Just a glance, quick as the shift of light across the counter, but enough for me to notice. I began to sit in the same booth near the window. It wasn't intentional at first, but after the third or fourth visit, she raised a brow at me as she set down a menu. "Again?" she teased, her voice calm but carrying the faintest note of amusement. I shrugged, smiling lightly. "It's a good view." She tilted her head, clearly unconvinced. "The street outside, or the same table?" I held her gaze a beat longer than I should have. "Both." Her lips pressed together, fighting back a smile, before she shook her head and walked off to take another order. From then on, our conversation stayed small, tucked between her work, little remarks, half smiles, her hand brushing the edge of my table as she passed. But those fragments began to feel heavier than entire conversations I'd had with other people. I noticed things I hadn't before. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when nervous. How her laughter carried a low, unforced warmth that made the air feel lighter. And the way her eyes softened whenever she thought no one was watching. And she noticed things too. How I lingered after finishing my meal, sipping slowly at my coffee just to stay longer. How I'd wait for her to have a moment free, not pushing, just present. One evening she came over with the pot, the same ritual as always. But this time, as she steadied the cup, my hand moved too quickly, trying to help. Our fingers collided, warm skin against warm skin. Neither of us pulled away right away. Her hand hovered over mine for a breath too long, the heat sinking into me in a way that felt disproportionate to the tiny touch. My chest tightened, my heart pressing hard against my ribs. She glanced at me then, and her eyes flickered with something unspoken. A question. Maybe a warning. Maybe both. And then, just as gently, she slipped her hand back and continued pouring, as if nothing had happened. But we both knew it wasn't nothing. The diner's hum carried on, the hiss of the coffee machine, the murmur of a family in the corner, the faint music crackling through the speakers. And yet that single brush of her fingers haunted the air between us, heavy and delicate all at once. Later, as I stood to leave, she stopped by my booth to collect the empty plate. Her hand brushed the edge of the table again, almost deliberately this time, her knuckles grazing mine. A fleeting touch. A promise wrapped in hesitation. And when I stepped out into the cool night air, I realized I was smiling to myself, not because of anything she said, but because of everything she didn't. She moved slower than usual, not from carelessness but from the kind of fatigue that comes only after hours of giving pieces of yourself to strangers. When she finally set down her tray and untied the knot of her apron, I saw her shoulders drop, just slightly, as if releasing a burden. And then, to my quiet surprise, she slid into the booth across from me. "Don't get used to this," she said, her voice carrying that mix of firmness and humor I was beginning to recognize as uniquely hers. "I just needed a seat for 5 minutes." I smiled, trying not to look too pleased. "Fair warning taken." For a moment neither of us spoke. She ran her thumb absent-mindedly along the handle of a silver spoon that lay between us, spinning it gently, the metal catching the dim light. Her hair was looser now, a few strands falling against her face, and without the constant movement of serving tables, she seemed different, more real, more human than the role she wore behind the counter. "You know," she said finally, her voice softer, "people don't usually see me past the uniform. The apron, the smile, the coffee pot, that's all they notice. That's all they want to notice." Her eyes stayed fixed on the spoon, as though saying it directly to me would be too much. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice. "I don't think that's true. I think you just hide behind it because it's easier." That made her look up. Her gaze met mine, steady but uncertain, as if weighing how much truth she could afford to share. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said, but the words lacked conviction. I didn't press. Instead, I watched as her hand kept moving the spoon, restless. Without thinking too much about it, I reached across the table and gently placed my fingers over hers, stilling the motion. Her hand went still beneath mine. Warmth spread between our skin, subtle but undeniable. For a second, I worried she would pull away. But she didn't. Instead, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her shoulders lowering even more. She glanced down at our hands, then back up at me, her lips parting as if to say something. But no words came. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, thick with everything we weren't yet ready to admit out loud. Finally, she gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh, pulling her hand back to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Your trouble," she murmured, but there was no edge to it. Only something softer. And though she stood to return to her work, the ghost of her touch lingered with me long after she walked away. The rain came down hard that night, tapping against the diner windows in steady streams. Each droplet shimmered under the neon lights outside, making the world look blurred, softened, as though it were all wrapped in a dream. Inside, the diner was quieter than usual. Only a handful of late-night customers lingered, and she moved between them with a calm patience that spoke of practiced endurance. When the clock struck closing time, I noticed her glance toward the door, then at the darkened street beyond. She exhaled as she wiped down the counter, tying her coat more tightly around herself. I didn't plan to speak, but the words rose naturally. "Let me walk you home." She froze briefly, then turned, giving me that look she always gave when she wasn't sure if she should be amused or concerned. "That's not necessary." I smiled gently, sliding out of the booth. "Maybe not. But it's raining, and I have an umbrella. Seems wasteful to keep it to myself." For a moment she just looked at me, searching, weighing. Then, finally, she nodded once, a quiet surrender. The air outside was cool and damp, carrying the scent of rain-soaked pavement. I held the umbrella above us, and she stepped closer than she probably realized. Her shoulder brushed mine, warm through the thin layers of fabric, and though either of us said anything, the nearness carried its own language. We walked in rhythm, the rain drumming overhead in a gentle, endless song. Streetlights cast halos across puddles, and our reflections wavered with each step. She kept her hands tucked in her coat pockets, but at one corner, a car splashed too close to the sidewalk, sending water spraying near us. Without thinking, she gripped my forearm tightly, her fingers pressing through my sleeve. It lasted only a second, but her touch lingered as though it had left an imprint. She didn't pull away immediately, and I didn't move, letting her hand rest there a moment longer than needed. My pulse quickened beneath her fingers, and when she finally let go, the absence of her touch felt sharper than its presence. "You really didn't have to," she murmured, her voice quieter than the rain. "I know," I said. "But I wanted to." Her eyes flicked toward me then, soft and unreadable. A small smile tugged at her lips, faint, hesitant, but there. She shook her head as if trying to dismiss the moment, yet she walked a little closer after that, our arms brushing with each step. By the time we reached her street, the rain had thinned into a mist. The buildings stood quiet and dark, windows glowing faintly here and there. She stopped near the steps to her apartment, turning to face me beneath the dim porch light. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying that same mix of caution and warmth I was beginning to crave. And though she held her keys tightly in her hand, she didn't move right away. She stayed there, close enough for the rain's cool mist to drift between us, close enough for me to feel the pull of everything unspoken. We stopped at the base of her apartment steps, the rain still whispering around us. The porch light above flickered faintly, casting a soft glow across her face. Her hair was damp, strands clinging to her cheeks, and though she looked tired, she carried a kind of quiet beauty that made it impossible for me to look away. She fumbled with her keys, her fingers moving slower than usual. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was the moment. Either way, the pause stretched, and neither of us seemed in a hurry to break it. "Thank you for walking me," she said softly. Her voice carried warmth but also hesitation, like she wasn't sure if gratitude was all she wanted to express. I nodded. "I'm glad I did." The rain tapped gently on the umbrella above us, filling the silence. I could feel my heartbeat pressing harder against my chest, not from nerves alone but from the weight of everything unsaid between us. She glanced up then, her eyes lingering on my face. There was no playful shield this time, no easy mask of a waitress used to hiding behind polite smiles. Just her. Vulnerable. Searching. A strand of wet hair slipped across her cheek, and before I could stop myself, I lifted my hand. Slowly, carefully, I tucked the strand behind her ear, my fingers brushing the curve of her cheek as I did. The touch was brief, but the warmth of her skin against my fingertips seemed to spark through me, leaving a trail of heat that lingered even after I pulled back. Her breath caught, so soft I almost didn't hear it. She didn't step away. Instead, she tilted her face just slightly, as though leaning into the space where my hand had been. "This feels wrong," she whispered. Her words trembled, caught between warning and confession. For a moment, I almost stepped back. Almost. But the look in her eyes stopped me, the conflict, yes, but also the longing she tried so hard to bury. "Then why?" I asked quietly, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. "Does it feel right?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, silence filled the space between us again, thick with possibility. The rain softened to a mist around us, the city hummed distant, muffled. I could feel the urge to close the distance, to lean forward and let the moment carry us further. But I didn't. I stayed still, letting her decide. Her eyes flickered over my face, pausing at my lips before returning to my eyes. She exhaled slowly, shaking her head with a faint, almost disbelieving smile. Then she stepped closer, not much, but enough that I felt the warmth of her body through the damp air, enough that our breaths mingled in the narrow space left between us. Neither of us moved beyond that. We didn't need to. The closeness was its own confession, its own surrender. And standing there, with her just inches away, I realized something had shifted. We were no longer pretending this was just chance, just polite conversation. Something deeper had taken root, fragile and frightening, but undeniable. For a moment neither of us moved. The world seemed to hold its breath around us. The drizzle of rain, the hum of a distant car, the flicker of the porch light above her door. She was close enough that I could feel the faint warmth radiating from her, even through the cool mist of the night. Close enough that if I leaned forward just slightly, the fragile line we had been walking would disappear completely. But I didn't. And neither did she. Instead, she let out a quiet laugh, so soft it was more like a sigh, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe where the night had brought us. "You complicate things," she murmured. I smiled gently. "Maybe. Or maybe I just see things for what they are." Her eyes lingered on mine, uncertain yet unwilling to look away. Then, slowly, she closed the distance, not with a kiss, not with a dramatic declaration, but by leaning forward until her forehead rested lightly against my chest. The move was simple, but it carried more weight than any words could have. I froze for a moment, not from fear, but from the tenderness of it. The feeling of her there, trusting me enough to let down her guard, pressed against me in a way that made the whole world fall away. I brought my arms up carefully, wrapping them around her with the same patience that had carried us this far. Her cheek rested against my shirt, damp from the rain, and I could feel the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, slower now, calmer, as though something inside her had finally allowed itself to breathe. My chin brushed the crown of her head, her hair carrying the faint scent of rain and coffee. Neither of us spoke. There was no need. The silence between us was no longer heavy with questions, it was warm, filled with understanding. When she finally pulled back, it wasn't with distance but with a smile, small, tired but real. Her hand lifted, hesitant at first, then settled gently on my arm, her fingers curling just enough to hold me there. "I don't know where this goes," she admitted, her voice quieter than the rain. "But tonight, I don't want to think about that." I nodded, my thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles where her hand rested against me. "We don't have to. Tonight is enough." Her eyes softened, and she leaned in once more, resting her head against me again. This time, I held her closer, no hesitation, no doubt. Just the two of us standing there on a quiet street, wrapped in the hush of the night and the unspoken promise of something new. The rain eased to a drizzle, the city around us carrying on as if nothing had changed. But for us, everything had. And as I stood there, holding her in the glow of the flickering porch light, I realized the truth. Sometimes love doesn't announce itself with grand gestures or dramatic words. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through lingering glances, through brushes of hands, through the silence of two people finally letting themselves belong to the moment. That night, in her arms and she in mine, was enough. More than enough. 6.